Hello. I'm going to give a long talk, and I know that you like short snippets, but this isn't a short snippet. It's a long talk on the subject of disconnection and how we move from disconnection to unity. I suggest, after having listened to why we're disconnected, that you take a break. It'll be about 40 minutes to that point. Have a nice coffee, a nice cup of tea, rest, and then go on to the next part of this talk, which will be how we can move beyond that and experience unity. Because my thesis is that we suffer from a disease, and it's a disease of feeling disconnected from ourselves, from our bodies, from our emotions, from each other, from animals, from nature, from the planet, and that we live mainly in our heads and are often rigid and joyless and fearful and insecure. And the reason is that we've been brought up on stories. We've been born into a culture that has given us stories telling us that we're disconnected. And these stories have permeated the myths that we've learned to identify ourselves with and see the world through. Another way to put it is to say that the industrially civilized culture we live in has colonized a lot of us, has forced us to be estranged from ourselves, and in so doing has infantilized and superficialized us with very severe consequences. And the great scholar Ian McGilchrist, who's written many, many, many great books, one of the great thinkers of our time, in a lecture, he said, we all live in a culture compelling us to disattend to the right hemisphere or the right side of our brain, which connects us with a deeper reality and enhances our capacity to be noble, altruistic, experience joy, awe, and wonder. And for Ian, the great tragedy is that most of us live primarily in the left hemisphere of our brain. And he says this conspires to devitalize us. And everything that helps connect us to ourselves and our world, and thus enables us to appreciate life, therefore becomes distorted and seen through a lens of separation. It's not that we don't feel feelings, he tells us, but more often they tend to be shallow and to be more about anger, aggression, disgust, and criticism than about anything else. We live, in other words, as John Donne said, that metaphysical poet all those years ago, as islands unto ourselves, disconnected from the main. And this sense of feeling disconnected brings about a lot of the weird ways that we operate, because we often try to get power over what we feel disconnected from, power over other people, to be more powerful than them, and to try to own things. If we're in a relationship and we don't know how to really feel ourselves into the beingness of the other person, we may try to control them or own them in some way. That's a kind of substitute way of trying to deal with the dismay of feeling disconnected, i.e., if we can't flow with our world, let's try and possess it. And all the power games that get played out in the world, with all their disastrous consequences come out of our feeling separate. But these plays, these ploys, these games we play don't work. And actually they make us feel more disconnected. And especially when we behave in cruel and thoughtless ways, we cut ourselves off from life even more. In my experience, people who feel separate, who suffer from this disease, they know how to do, they know how to think, they know how to operate, but it's in a non-holistic, non-heartful way. They don't know how to be. They don't know how to feel aware of life's beautiful essence, the beauty, the sacredness, as they don't know how to penetrate those sheaths. And therefore, when we feel like this, I say they, I have a part of me as well, and I wouldn't be able to talk about this if I didn't understand this from within myself. We feel there's something wrong with us, and that if we only work harder, do more and achieve more, our problems will be solved. And in fact, that doesn't work. It just enhances our inhumanity. We may know people who are very busy, but it doesn't compensate from the whole, H-O-L-E, that we feel inside ourselves. Because feeling separate, we feel there's a hole, there's something wrong. And I see that all our attempts to try to compensate by drugs or alcohol or work or being busy, they may seem to fill the hole at the time being, but actually they make it worse in the long run. Because when we feel separate, we feel there's a boundary between us and the world, us and animals, us and nature. We can't feel ourselves into it. And drugs will somehow, in an artificial way, appear to melt that boundary. Particularly if we're very drunk. We say, oh yes, I love everything, blah, 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 blah. But it's a kind of ersatz connectiveness. It's not the real thing, it's a mirage, and that's the real tragedy. And a lot of us feel, well, it's the normal way to be, and it's true, it is normal. But folks, it ain't natural. That we can contrast this with indigenous people. They've been reared in cultures where the story they've been introduced to is much more of a holistic one. It's not about separation. They're not taught left-brainism. They're not inducted in the politics of separation. They're brought up to feel a kinship with their fellow human beings and encouraged to relate together in a heartful way. In my experience of having worked with indigenous people, in fact, sort of having learned a great deal from them, having been on many vision quests and having sort of learned from tribal peoples, is that they listen to what their unconscious is trying to tell them. They listen to the voice of their dreams. They're open to the messages that their deeper selves are trying to tell them. And so they don't just inhabit our planet as we do, or as many of us do, as outsiders, but they feel they're part of its consciousness, they're part of Gaia, they're part of the earth, they're part of nature. And therefore, they have a particular responsibility towards Mother Earth, and that damaging it is damaging ourselves. Our ecological problems come because we don't feel connected to Gaia, to the name that has been given to our Mother Earth. And so it doesn't feel as if we're doing damage to our planet. And similarly to other people, that we can be nasty and horrible to them because we don't feel into their beingness. We're separate from them. So we can't have a sense of how they feel. And if we're disconnected from something or somebody or from animals, whatever it is, we can't treat it with respect because we can't see into its isness. We can't get it that life has value in and of itself, not because it's worth something materially. And indigenous people understand that the trees, the animals and the oceans and the mountains are all imbued with the same living spirit which is inside them. And that everything is interconnected. Aurel Lands, an Aboriginal elder, gave a talk to the UN. Here's what he said: power is not manifest in the human body. Power lies with our Creator. And if we continue, as humankind seems to be doing, to destroy our environment, which is the source of our lives, then we'll all suffer. You dismiss animals and birds and people with different colored skins, but our Creator made us all equal, all part of creation. Animals and birds all live in a state of grace. We need to live in that way. Jesus talked a lot about grace. He said, many are called, but few are chosen. It sounds as if we're all being selected out and fail to pass the test. Actually, that ain't the case. The truth is that grace, or the spirit of life, or soulfulness, or the spirit of unity, whatever we want to call it, soulfulness calls out to all of us. But most of us are too frozen into the rigidities or into our clenchedness or into our separation stories to hear. Those emotional steel cages which incarcerate so many of us don't open enough to enable these sacred messages to penetrate. So we can't hear grace, we can't feel it, we're not aware of it, because if we're separate, we miss out on a lot of the subtler nuances of life. And that's the illness that so many of us suffer from. In fact, symptomatic of that illness is that we live in a narrow universe. Our worlds are small. They're not wide. And therefore, if our worlds are small, we feel insecurity. If I don't feel connected to another person, I feel they might want to hurt me. I may project my own separation that I feel onto them and feel that they're seeing me through the eyes of fear as well. And that's why there's so much violence and hostility in the world, especially with people who don't look like us or have the same beliefs as us or the same skin color as us or the same religions as us or the same backgrounds as us, or the same social understanding as us. We don't know how to relate to people who are different from us, and what we call difference separation. And I work as a psychotherapist and a soul guide. And I come to the conclusion that many of the problems that my dear clients have, where they feel cut off, is that they feel disconnected. And I think that to feel disconnected is to be deprived of a certain form of nourishment that we need. It's like we have a diet with no vegetables in it or no fruit, because the sense of being connected and feeling a sense of unity with nature, or an empathy with other people, or a harmony with animals. It's such a gift, and it's healing to us. And so it cuts us off from feeling joy. And I think that we need, all of us, to feel more joyful in our lives. It's the reason, I think, why our media is always emphasizing what's wrong with the world. And that's all we're told. I remember many, many years ago, I tried to start a magazine that would look at what was positive in the world. And guess how many issues it lasted for? 2, and we had to give it up. Because people get attached to their separation, their separationism. We get embroiled in the dramas. And of course, this is supported today by our constant diet of social media, being fed frivolous entertainment and reality TV, so that our heads are constantly being filled with trivia and mindless drama, which again fills up the space that could be filled with connecting and flowing freely or more intimately with the world around us. And today, fewer people explore their deeper creativity. Fewer people read profound novels or allow the arts to broaden and deepen them. And too many of us either work too hard and prefer being entertained and stimulated, as these activities feed our superficial, separate self. Satish Kumar, a man I'm very, very honored and privileged to know, an Indian eco-activist and philosopher, now in his 90s. He used to be a Jain monk. He's walked across the whole world, a great peace activist, a wonderful man. He talked about 3 ways of life. The first way he called the Sattvic. The Sattvic is the way of soul and grace, living according to the values, say, of Aboriginal people, where we honor our planet and feel connected to the spirit of our world. The second way, Satish called the Rajasic way, which is what I'd call the separate way that most of us dwell in a lot of the time. The third way he called the Tamasic way. And Tamasic is what happens when the Rajasic can descend into a place where our sense of separation will have become utterly toxic and dangerous. I'll explain. The Rajasic way is the separate way that most of our world works today, or to be more accurate, doesn't work. It's the dysfunctional system which ensnares all of us in one way or another. This Rajasic way lies behind how much of the corporate world operates today, where activities are legitimate if there's money to be made. And there ain't a lot of kindness and compassion in this world. And if these qualities ever do get exhibited, the person will probably have temporarily exited this world and have hopped into another. Because as I explain in another talk on the different realities, while we live primarily in one world that we can access and touch into higher or more transcendent realities, or we can descend and fall down into more dungeonous worlds. But essentially, a lot of us live in the Rajasic world, where it's politics and power before people and planet. I experienced this in operation in close range many years ago, when I used to run an art gallery in London. And people would come in and glance at the art and say, who's the artist? And how much are these paintings or sculptures worth? i.e., they weren't interested in really looking at the paintings or the sculptures and feeling into them. They wanted to know if they were good investments. And a good investment was more important than beauty. And Gandhi understood this, and he said, we know the price of everything and the value of nothing. And that, again, is a symptom of the disconnected mindset. Now, this tamasic reality can very easily, this Rajasic reality can easily descend into the tamasic domain, where the disease enters a new deadly stage, where pure evil begins to raise its head. And in this world, climate change isn't an issue, and it doesn't matter if the whole planet explodes or collapses, disintegrates and implodes, as long as it doesn't affect me personally. It doesn't matter if rainforests are destroyed and tribes living there are expelled, so long as money is to be made. Trade is done without compassion, finance is utterly without fairness, and there's no humanity everywhere. And war is to be encouraged. For although it's a bit inconvenient that a lot of people die and get tortured and suffer, the arms dealers make a lot of money, and the ultra-rich do very well. A lot of people do very well with war. Do you remember in the days of the neocons in America, they talked about the idea of having continuous war for continuous peace. Terrible. Well, the abuse of human rights, which goes on all over the world, happens because many people have fallen into the tamasic realm. They've so far abandoned their humanity. And in fact, the greater distance we are from our right brain, from our heart, from true values, from the values of the Aboriginal people, say, the greater our proclivity for evil and doing harm. And all tyrants and autocrats plumb the murky depths of this tamasic world that is utterly desouled and disconnected from goodness of any kind. And we see this, of course, in Putin's paranoia and his demented desire to not lose face at any cost. So millions of people can die. The ecology of the planet can be disturbed. Ukraine can be destroyed as a country. His own people can lose their lives, just so that this sad, egotistical, inhuman little man does not lose face. When we're in the disconnected world, our values get very skewed. Putin is utterly, I mean, I just give an example of Putin, but there's other people. Again, Trump's another good example. He hasn't descended quite as low as Putin yet, but one's disconnected from anything real. I recently came across the word wetico, which characterizes the Tomasic state, and it's an Algonquin term to describe a cabalistic spirit that can possess us and whose symptoms include feeling utterly driven by greed, the need for power, material success, and selfish consumption. And today, this evil virus is wrapping its pathological tentacles around increasing numbers of us. And this is one reason why the fascistic right-wing, ultra-right-wing mindset is growing in the world, and more fascistic leaders are coming into positions of power. Okay, folks, time for a break, time for a coffee, time for a rest, because now what I'm going to talk about is what do we do to break through this separateness and find our humanity? Or in other words, how can we become more connected to ourselves and our world? So, change of gear. I believe there's a lot of things we can do. So long as we only suffer this disease of disconnection at a rajasic level and haven't tumbled too far into the tamasic. I think it's difficult, if we're a Trump or a Putin, to come back. We may have a crisis that's so big that will turn them inside out and upside down, and suddenly they would see the light. But at the moment, I don't see that Tomasic people are going to break through their separateness because it works for them, or they're so attached or so addicted, so encrusted in their separateness that the disease, the wetico virus, the disease has got such a hold of them that there's no desire to move or to change. But for those of us who realize there's something wrong, who are beginning to be aware of the dangers of our world situation, who are beginning to be aware that we're not as happy and joyful as we might be, there are things that we can do. And I think the first thing is to be clear about the separation that we feel that really is a disease. A disease that can be healed if we take it seriously and are willing to work at it. And I want to say that it's worth working at, and I've tried to do so in my own life, having been brought up very much along Rajasic lines. But it's important that we take this healing of this inner disease seriously. And I can honestly say that today I'm an ancient old fogey, but the quality of my life is much better. Because although I have less, I do less than I did when I was younger, that my outer world has, its proportions have restricted a little bit. My inner world is so much wider. I receive from things now that in the past I was blocked to. In the past, grace would come knocking at my door, but I didn't hear it because I wasn't listening. So the question is, how do we open the door into our deeper selves? How do we let go the myth of our separation, together with all the beliefs, perceptions, activities, and value traits that accompany it? Well, I think one of the first things is that we need to look at ourselves seriously. Do we have racist aspects in us? Do we enjoy being out in nature? Do we enjoy other human beings if we can't get anything out of them, i.e. just appreciate them for just being them, not because we can make money from them or they'll be a partner for us or anything? Can we feel awe of life? We need to look at ourselves very, very clearly. In my own case, I don't think I ever accessed the Tamasic realms. I'm lucky. But I felt that something was crucial, was missing in my life. It wasn't that I was a loner and didn't have friends and was not busy, but I felt that I wasn't intimate with myself and my world. That was the wound. It was a wound of intimacy. And I could, for example, appreciate the outer beauty of someone, but I didn't know how to feel their inner beauty. And in my case, I needed quite a few crises to wake me up. And I've written about these crises in my book, Amazing Grace. And I've also defined grace. I've included grace as being those crises that come in our lives that help to wake us up. But we don't all have to go through crises. And sometimes we just wake up one day and we look at our lives and we realize there's something missing. That we're not living the life that we could be living. And it's not because of outer things that we're that we're denying ourselves, but inner things. I came across this great quote by Jean Houston, an academic. She said, "We're all born Stradivariuses, but raised to believe we are plastic fiddles." Fantastic line, isn't it? We're all born with fullness inside us. We're all born with the capacity to feel, to be united with other people, to feel the joy of our planet. But then we grow up, and if we aren't part of an indigenous tribe, we get socialized by a culture which presses down on our unity of capabilities. And it plastic fiddleizes us. Our beauty gets covered over. And I think that that's a great tragedy, but it seems to be built into the way that life is. And in my case, I had to address why this was so, and what it was about the world that my mother and father created for me, the world that the culture around me created for me, that allowed me, as it were, to close down onto who I really was, and to grow up by closing down as opposed to growing up by opening up. The disease of disconnection moves us on the whole to be disconnected with our bodies unless we're having sex, of course, which is one reason why so many people are obsessed by sex in our culture, because it's one way that we connect to a more ecstatic self that we've sort of pushed away. So that we can start the reconnecting process by taking up something like yoga, tai chi, or qigong, because they're all spiritual disciplines that involve movement and connect mind and body and spirit. Or we can learn dancing. We need to learn to dance more, to dance with our spirit more. And anything that we can do with our bodies, because we hold this separation in the rigidities in our bodies. Another thing that I did was that, having realized my wound, I made it my business to hang out with people who were wise people who weren't wounded, who were connected to themselves. And in dancing in their slipstream, in following in their slipstream by being around them, I learned to dance my life in a new way. And I went to California. I was very lucky. I went to California, and I turned up on the doorsteps of a lot of healers and psychotherapists and gurus and acupuncturists and visionaries and spiritual teachers, because I realized I needed help to free me from my plastic fiddleness that I was beginning to realize was not who I really was. I knew intellectually that I was a Stradivarius, but I had no experience of it. And I remember one wise woman telling me that you need to recognize, Serge, that you're in a prison and you won't get out until you understand how thick and strong the bars are. It was true. But when we know what the prison is, I mean, it's just like, I don't know if you ever read that old book, The Colditz Story, in Second World War, how our prisoner of wars escaped from Colditz, this apparently impenetrable prison in Germany. Well, in order to escape, they had to know all the restrictions, where the headlights were, what the guards' routines were, what vulnerable parts there were in the prison, and then, only then, could they plan their escape. And it's a similar story with us, only in our case, it's about escaping from the inner prison. And we need to understand our inner prison well. One thing that I realized from hanging out with these wise people was that they were much more interested in embracing positive values, values that united, like love and kindness and joy and beauty and truth. And they gave much less energy to the qualities that disunite. And from that positive place, I was helped to go into what Carl Jung called our shadow, which a Jungian described as that which is darkness to our light, unknown to what we call familiar, that which comes from the other side of our motives, the other side of our virtues, and from the other side of our vices. In other words, I needed to go down into my unconscious and discover what the qualities were that held me in prison. And I also needed to travel up into my superconscious, my transpersonal unconscious, and find those qualities that I could bring down to help heal my wounds. And what I began to explore or to discover was that by going into and experiencing parts of myself that I felt were disgusting and horrible and awful and selfish and mean and cruel and all this stuff down in my lower shadow, I also, by exploring into my higher order shadow that I was also not conscious of, that there were qualities of me that were caring and empathic and loving and compassionate. And so I realized that in order to get out of my separation, I had to expand the parameters of who I believed I was and discover that I wasn't just this separate self. Serge, the separate self, the plastic fiddle. And so I began to expand my sense that having lived a lot of my life here, I began slowly to open up and to finding out more about who this person Serge was, finding out more dimensions of myself and of the world out there, because as I expanded, so my vision of the world expanded, because the world that we see out there is a reflection of the world inside us. If most of our visionary capabilities are closed off, we're going to look out in the world at the most beautiful things and we won't see anything, we'll just see plastic. When our visionary capabilities begin to open up, we look out and our lenses have expanded and we see out there what is a reflection inside us. So life began to take on more dimensions. Life began to have new meanings to it. I found myself seeing new parts of myself and of other people, and appreciating other people more, and appreciating myself more. And people suddenly became richer and more interesting. And I discovered that why I had often found people boring was that I was very limited in myself, and I was projecting my own boringness onto them. And as I began to expand and come closer to me, I allowed a space for people to come closer to me. And it felt good. And I no longer felt like this island disconnected from the whole. And it happened gradually. And as it happened, I began to realize the truth of what I had known with my left brain before, that all of life was interconnected. I'd read that. But now I began to experience it, and being out in nature in particular, I could feel how the trees and the animals and the mulch and the mushrooms and the flowers growing and the birds and the animals, that somehow this all was part of one interconnected whole, and that I was part of it. And that from having lived on the outside of life, I was suddenly being allowed to live more on the inside. So instead of always reacting to the outside, I was living more from within me. I was more causal. But as this was all happening, I realized something else. I realized that there was a resistance in me, and that a part of me did not want to fully leave my old limited tracks. And I noticed a funny mantra going on inside me, and it kind of went like this: please, can I feel happier and more connected to myself? But please, may this happen without anything needing to change inside me. So that just as I was being handed a key to fully unlock my cage, I saw how attached to it I was. It kept me safe. Feeling separated gave me something. I was safe, that the world out there could not touch me. It couldn't get through to me. I had this protection around me. But at the same time, so nothing in me could get out. So that I was cut off. I was safe, but cut off. And I had to work through a part of me that was afraid of a more potentially unitive reality. What if I get free and find my freedom is not that great thing? And what guarantees are there that I am going to fully be free? And I also had to face that part of me that had been brought up according to the idea of original sin and the Christianity that sort of tells us to feel guilty for being a sinner, and that we need to be ashamed for not being as perfect as Christ was perfect, and to remember that Christ died on the cross for our sins. And I got to see that this part of the separation story had also got into me. And I felt that I wasn't enjoying my life, or that I didn't deserve this freedom. I didn't deserve to open up into my, to move away from my plastic fiddlery. That I wasn't a good enough person. I hadn't helped enough old ladies across the road. I hadn't given enough. I hadn't, I didn't deserve more joy, more love, and that I needed to suffer. I didn't deserve to discover my Stradivarius self. And so I had to see that there was a kind of attachment to suffering. And then I found that quite a lot of spiritual teachers understood this. And one teacher, especially called Gurdjieff, I found that he said, the thing we're most attached to and least willing to give up is our suffering. And I saw that. And I also got to see, and I'm still seeing it, is that this is the big problem in the world today. Human collectively, we're creating a world of suffering for ourselves at many, many different levels. And we know that the old story doesn't work, but we're afraid of moving into a new, more abundant way of being. Now, what the key thing for me, and it was so key that I wrote a book about it 10 years ago, was finding teachers who helped me awaken my heart. Because the whole thing, how the separation story is kept in place, is through our hearts being closed. And in all the education I had, at school, at university, with my parents, all the emphasis was on the left brain, sort of knowledge, mind. There was no training of the heart. I was never brought up to feel that the heart had importance. I was brought up to feel that the heart, and talking about the inner heart, was that mushy thing, that sentimental thing, where we get all sort of muddled and silly, and that the real thing is the left brain. But that's the story of separation. My school motto went mens sana in corpore sano, a healthy mind and a healthy body, no mention of the heart. And I realized that the missing ingredient, the core ingredient to help me through my resistance, my feelings that I didn't deserve it, my feelings that I needed to suffer, my feelings that I wasn't good enough to evolve, was my heart. And here's what the poet John O'Donoghue said about the heart, and it's so great, these words. Without the heart, and again, he's talking about the inner heart, the human would be sinister. To be able to feel is the great gift. When you feel for another, you become united with that person in an intimate way. Your concern and compassion come alive, drawing some of the other person's world and spirit into yours. Without the ability to feel, friendship and love could never be born. This makes the human heart the jewel of the world. Well, the heart's our right brain, really. And it's not that Rajasic man is totally heartless, cold, unfeeling, black hole. But his heart is not deep, it's not fully open. It's a little bit open, but it's not open enough. And what I realized with my heart was that my heart was timid. It had wounds inside it, and I needed to heal some of the wounds in my heart that made it afraid of opening. I had to learn to trust in my heart. And I needed to trust that as my heart opened and I expanded and stopped reducing myself, that by the same token, I was helping expand and stop reducing the world outside me. As my heart began to open, what I really got to see with some sorrow was how much I reduced other people because I didn't see them through the lens of my heart, which allows us to see their sacredness and their beauty. I saw them through the lens of my mind. And that doesn't see the fullness of a person. So I was always reducing people. I was a reductor, not an expander. Glasses were always half empty. You see, heart can see the beauty in what the left brain sees as ugly. And instead of weakness, the heart sees tenderness and vulnerability. And heart embraces differences and doesn't see them as separationisms fighting each other. With heart that we can appreciate life, there's a new sense of awe. We begin to see the sacred in the mundane, the extraordinary in the ordinary. And life becomes richer. And I realized that in my separation Rajasic days, I needed all those fancy bells and whistles around me because I needed to create an image of myself to compensate for my plastic fiddlery, to compensate for this reductive, separate person that I felt. I had to try and kid people that I was more than how I believed I was. But it wasn't the truth because I wasn't in touch with that more. And today, I live in the smallest house I've ever lived in, but because there's abundance in my heart, I don't need anything bigger. And also because I no longer feel separate from other people, I no longer need to do what I used to do when I was younger, work so hard at letting them know that I was better than them. This is no longer important. I used to, in the past, I'd meet people and I'd have to show them that I really had a justification for being. Look, you know, I'm so important, I'm doing this or that, or look how cool my clothes are, or I had to somehow compensate. And again, we look at all the tyrants around. the Erdogans, that sort of Putin, Trump, all these people, they're all people who feel plastic fiddles. They have to compensate, to let us know that they're powerful, great people. And that's why you and I are so challenged to change the world, because only if we change ourselves inside can the world outside be. And when our hearts open, when my heart opened, it didn't exclude the left side of my brain. It didn't exclude my rational self. And I felt that a new fusion of the heart and the mind was able to take place. And when I began to study the works of the great visionaries and mystics and scientists and great writers and poets, one realized that all of them worked through a combination of the heart and the mind and the soul. Yes, our heart has a tremendous transformational power. The great theologian and futurist Teilhard de Chardin wrote in the 1950s that there's more power in the awakened human heart than inside the atomic bomb. And I believe this, because when our hearts are closed down, we're asleep to our interconnectedness and to the beauty and the majesty of other people and our planet as a whole. Our power lies in our heart. But it's very difficult for people to get this. I've worked quite a bit with businesses, with small businesses, sort of helping them to bring more heart into their work. And I've always had to do it from a perspective of having to let them know that they're going to make more profit as a result, which is generally what always happens, because unless I put the Rajasic element, people are not interested in awakening their heart just for themselves. But the truth is that everything in our life can expand and become more joyful. And I call my book Awakening the Universal Heart, because I became aware that at a certain point in the journey of our hearts, that we come to realize that they're not just our personal property, Serge's heart, but they're part of a much larger human collective heart. And that's how we can understand other people despite their being different from us, i.e., we're all interconnected on the Great Heart Highway. We're all part of the heart of humanity as a whole. We're all little heartlets streaming out of the collective heart. And we're part of the heart of our planet and the whole universe. And that's pretty awesome. My heart is connected to your heart. Our hearts are connected to the heart of humanity. If my heart feels love, it goes to the whole of humanity. If your heart feels love, it goes to the whole of humanity. And when we begin to wake up from the disease of our separation, we realize that we're all interconnected and we always have been. But we need to do things to help keep us in that understanding. In exactly the same way that an athlete will be a good athlete and he'll win a race, he'll win a tennis match, he needs to go on training so that he keeps in good shape. Because if he stops training, it'll all fall away. So to keep anchored in the knowledge of our Stradivariousness, we need to do things that help keep us in good fettle. And here are a few points that help us move from disconnection to unity. One thing I do that helps me stay centered in the heart is that I always try to relate to everyone and everything entering my orbit through my heart. I try to be heartful to those I meet. I try to address those people whom I encounter in a kindly way, so that I see those whom I meet in the course of the day or those whom I work with in my therapy practice, those clients whom I see, they're all part of my heart training. I try to stay in my heart as a reminder. And it's also a way of making me feel happy. If I walk down the street and I see someone through my heart, it makes me feel happy. And if they see it, it may make them feel happy. Second point is that we really need to want to be free. And so we need to be prepared to confront whatever it is that comes in our way that tries to oppose our freedom. Because I feel that the journey of moving from separationism and disunity to unity is a kind of initiation. And so everything that happens in our lives can be used as a means of helping us deepen our transition. Because the name of the game is not just that we touch hearts sometimes, a couple of hours a day, it's nice, we're in heart, but that we try to live from this place and do our work from this place, do our relationships from this place, engage with other people from this place, do our shopping from this place, clean our teeth from this place, eat our food from this place, go for hikes from this place. So life is testing us, and it's particularly testing us at this moment. And that goes along with the fact that often we need to confront new parts of ourselves that we haven't yet discovered or uncovered that may still resist, that may still be rigid. And we always need to be open to whatever is coming either up from us from our lower unconscious, and down from us from our higher unconscious. So we need to remain open and mindful to what is going on and happening in our lives at any time. Meditation and prayer are incredibly important. Meditation quietens us down, and in doing so, it allows space for our heart to open like a flower. Because if we've always got, sort of anxiety and stress and our heart feels a little timid and, it prefers to stay shut. So if we quieten ourselves, it allows a space for our deeper Stradivarius, heartfelt self to come up. And it also allows us to continue the story of becoming more detached from our old values, beliefs, dramas, and stuff that kept us caught into the old story, into the story of disconnection. When I meditate, I'm able to stand back and observe myself. And I can observe where I might be attached to something. I observed the other day, I thought I'd moved beyond a particular sort of quality. And I was suddenly in a certain situation, and I saw with sadness, because I thought it had gone, that there was a part of me that was still vain, that minded how other people saw me, that minded how I looked. I thought that had gone. So I was able to take that vanity of mine into my heart and breathe with it and feel it. And by doing so, I hope it's getting smaller. So be awake to whatever comes up for you and take it into your heart. And perhaps some old sorrow, some old pain, or some new sorrow and new pain comes up. Stay with it, be with it, take it into your heart, that this is the central part of my work. And by the way, if any of you who've got so far in this course and are still listening, I offer you a free session should you want to talk about anything that I have mentioned in this talk. So only those of you who will have stuck with me get this little gift, but I would be very happy to give you an hour of my time. And it's not being kind, it feels it's my natural work. I love doing it. You would be helping me because it helps exercise my heart when I can open my heart and support people. So please feel free to send me an email and be in touch. Prayer. Prayer is important. Prayer is a kind of dialogue with the universe. And we can ask the universe for things that we feel we need. Although Janis Joplin's prayer, "Oh Lord, won't you buy me a Mercedes-Benz? My friends all have Porsches, I must make amends." I would prefer a prayer to have been, "Oh Lord, please make me okay with the old car that I have and not feel so jealous of those who have them, who have Porsches. So there's three kinds of prayer. One is prayer that we can ask for ourselves. Please may my life open up more. Please may a loving partner come into my life. Please may I have help in this difficult job I'm doing. That we can ask for help. Ask and ye shall receive. Sort of Jesus told us this. So it's okay to ask for ourselves. And so we can pray for ourselves. Another prayer I think is very useful is a prayer of gratitude. And we list and we put in our hearts all those things that we feel so grateful for. I feel so grateful for so much in my life that it quite uncovers or clouds over any part of me where I feel, disappointed that I haven't done this or been that. So every day give thanks for the gifts of your life. And you can also pray for other people, for friends of yours who are going through difficult times. And you can pray for the planet. Try to send healing energy to the people of Ukraine, for example. So experiment with prayer. Read some books about prayer. There's a lovely book on prayer written by David Lorimer about the prayers given by his teacher, Peter Dunoff. And you can look that up. David Lorimer, a book on the prayers of Peter Dunoff. So it's important to live more mindfully, to live more heartfully, to live in a space that we try to be more aware of what is right now in this moment with our heart. Because that's what brings in more dimensions of life. And to have great respect for life, especially for people who are different from us. I had the unfortunate training, as I've written in my memoirs, I was trained to be a terrible snob and not to have respect for people who are unlike me. And it was awful because it made me feel superior when inside me I actually felt inferior. And I needed to do a lot of prayer to be able to see the beauty and the tenderness in people who are very different from me. And now I'm beginning to move more into that place, and it gives me enormous joy. I no longer separate people. Also important that we find our creative dance in life. What our heart wants us to do, the work that our heart wants us to do. I have friends who've only devoted their life to making money, and they're rich at one level, but at other levels, I suspect they're not so rich. Find that thing which makes your heart dance. I'm tremendously lucky. I'm no intellect, I'm no poet or spiritual master or academic or philosopher. I'm not good at business. I don't cook or garden, and those things I'm not very good at. But I'm fond of people. And so I'm privileged in that I can work with people. And that allows my heart to A, get exercised, and B, to feel joyful. So when I have a day working with plants, I feel very joyful at the end of it. So I say to you, if you love plants, work with plants. If you're a poet, write poetry. If you're an artist, be an artist. Do the thing that your heart wants you to do. Engage with what is true for you, and the echoes of disconnection will begin to fall away. And also try to disconnect from the many superficializing influences around you, which do much to keep us perturbed, anxious, and disconnected with things that are real. I discovered from a client the other day that she spent 3 hours a day on social media, on Facebook, on Twitter, you name it. We worked at cutting down, and she's now down to about 3/4 of an hour. And the difference that this made to her emotional life was incredible. And many of her sort of problems have vanished away that were simply being held in place by 3 hours spent in those rather rancid, in some ways, world of the media. For me, the great heart connector is nature. I love being out in nature. I'm privileged here, living on this island of Mallorca. I can go out in nature and breathe nature, breathe through the trees and the mountains, and I can go to beaches. I'm so honored because it's so healing for me. So try and get into nature as much as you can. And I have a little theory that if we want to get healthy, the strongest thing that we can do is spend a lot of time in nature and try to connect with nature and feel the aliveness and the isness of nature, that trees exist for their own being, that they have a beauty and a right to be just for themselves. If you do that, it will do as much good as the fanciest dart that you can ever conjure up. So I'm just going to end by saying that most important really is the job of increasingly bringing heart into the work we do, and to have our lives be more and more focused into making a difference in the world. Because if we're focused on making a difference in the world, we're somehow connected to the world, and it takes us away from the old worlds of disconnection, which, by the way, are always trying to knock on our door and say, hey, don't abandon me, come back. But if we can really be an activist for something that touches us, for something that we believe strongly in, and that we want to give our heart to, it'll ground us in our humanity. And I like to see the process as being one of becoming more fully human. I don't like all this spirituality talk, because, spirituality, seems a little unworldly. Oh, yes, I'm this spiritual person. I'm so good. I'm so wonderful. I'm so spiritual. Be more human. Be more ordinary. Realize your divine, sacred ordinariness. And don't fall into the other pit of saying, I'm and spiritual, and so I'm special and superior to others, because then we get caught back in the old games of separation. I'm superior to others. So be aware of the need to be of service to life, to our fellow human beings, to animals, to our planet. So if there's some area that particular concerns us, the abuse of human rights, the abuse of rainforests, the abuse of women, all the plight of immigrants, whatever it is, find a means of taking a stand for what we believe. Because we need to take stands. We need to take stands to move us away from the stories of separation and disconnection and all the social and political and economic structures that are formed around that old story. We need to take stands for a new story, a story based on our being more fully human, a story based on connection and separation, connection and heart. So that it's very, very important that we live as the stand that we're taking. So, for example, if I have a stand that says I choose to try to bring more love into the world, and then I wake up one morning and I feel sort of mucky and I don't feel like that, it means that I explore why that is and what I need to do to change it, because I've made a commitment to taking a stand. If we've made a commitment to ending war or to seeing that a healthier political regime emerges in our country, then we need to devote our heart energy, our sacred energy, into being a space to help that process along. And we might face challenges and hazards. And I'm not talking about doing good deeds in a Boy Scout manner. Oh, I've got to go out of my way, I must do 2 good deeds a day, and so I'll help 2 old ladies across the road, and then I'll be a good boy. I think that trying to do what we can to make a difference in the world, at whatever level we do it, and I've talked about this a lot in both my book on Awakening the Heart and on Gateways to the Soul. If you want to find out more about activism, that you can find it in both books. But if we commit to it, then we need to live as our commitment. And that stretches us, doesn't strain us, it stretches us. And we need to be stretched. In the old Rajasic world, we're always being strained by anxiety. In the new world that we're trying to create and come into, we need to stretch ourselves into it. We need to stretch out our humanity. Because a better world is not going to come out of the blue. It's not going to descend from heaven and suddenly we'll be in a blissful world. There's a lot of Christian sects believe that sort of Jesus will come down, and everything will be fine. It's okay. No, we have to be the creators. We have to create a better world, because it's going to come from you and I, and not from them. Our politicians aren't going to do it. Our generals aren't going to do it. Our CEOs aren't going to do it, or they might do it if they see that it's important to awaken their hearts. But you and I, the ordinary person in the street, we've got a huge responsibility. Let's try and live our lives in a new way, in a unity way. And let's be patient. The process of surrendering our old disconnected self, it's a gradual process. So don't try and force things. Be the balance between stretching yourself but not forcing. That there's a Hindu saying that when the fruit is ripe, it falls from the tree. And what we need to do are things that will help us ripen more effectively. Thank you very much. I hope you survived this long talk.